the legend of the Devil's Racetrack. A long, long time ago, back when this was a new country, and North Carolina a brand new state, with Raleigh as its capital. Back when people traveled down dirt roads that were mere paths through the wilderness, and they traveled on foot, or by horseback, or in wagons. This was a time before trains and planes, before cars had been invented. Now, it so happened that in Johnston County, there was a long, winding, twisty dirt road. Went through woods and past numerous farms, crossed a lot of deep creeks and streams, and this road was called the Road to Raleigh, because this was a very common way for people to get to the new capital. The farmers along that road took turns and built bridges of wood or stone over the deep creeks and streams. Now there were two brothers who owned a farm along this road, George and Jeb Bynum. And these two brothers were known for three things. They were lazy, greedy, and mean. And they had built a stone bridge across one of the deeper creeks that was right next to their farm. George one day looked at his brother and said, "Jeb, it ain't right. It ain't right that we built that bridge and these other folks use it." Jeb agreed with his older brother. And so the two of them hatched a plan. They would take turns farming, and whosever day off it was from farming would keep watch at their bridge and charge people to pass it. Most people would have no choice, because to turn around and find another road could add hours or days to their journey. George and Jeb enjoyed their little scheme, and they became quite profitable. And then it was Jeb's turn to stand watch on one dark, cold, stormy October night. It's getting close to quitting time, and he couldn't wait as he sat astride his horse. Couldn't wait to be home with fire and a hot meal. It had been a very slow day at the bridge, due to the weather. George rode up alongside of him, said, "Jeb, let's go ahead and call it quits. Ain't nobody gonna be out in this weather." Jeb was more than happy to hear that. And as they got ready to ride home, over the sound of the wind and the rain, they heard the unmistakable creaking of a wagon's wheel. Now, being that these two were so greedy, they decided to wait for one last victim. Eventually, around the bend in the road, they saw an old, decrepit horse who looked as if it should have died years ago, pulling a wagon on the verge of falling apart. And driving the wagon, her crippled hands barely able to hold the reins, was a tiny, elderly woman. As she got up to the bridge, Jeb stopped her. "Halt! To pass our bridge, you gotta pay our price." And the old woman looked up at him with cold, black eyes that made him shiver, and said in a quavery voice, "Let me pass." Jeb looked at George and said, "Hey, she thinks she should pass without paying our price." And George laughed and went up alongside the wagon, began rummaging around to see if there's anything worth taking. And he said to the old woman, "If you won't pay our price, we'll just take something." When the the old woman looked at him, and she grabbed hold of his arm. Where she touched him, it felt like fire and ice at the same time, and George snatched his arm back in shock. And the old woman said again, "Let me pass." But George wasn't sure of what was going on. Meanwhile, Jeb had gone over to her horse and began unbuckling it from its traces. "I know, George. She don't want to pay our price. She can pull her own wagon. We'll take this worthless beast instead." And just as he undid the last buckle of the harness, his own horse reared up and, as if spooked, tore off down the road, around the bend, as fast as its legs could go. George immediately forgot about the old woman and having to take their price, because this road, with its twists and turns and narrow bridges and deep creeks, was dangerous in the daytime when the road was dry. And to be going as fast as Jeb's horse was going in a storm and in the dark, with it slick and muddy, was too dangerous. So George took off after his brother, hoping to be able to stop that horse. And as he went around another bend, he heard something from behind him. Something over the sound of the wind and the rain. And he took a quick glance over his shoulder to see, to his surprise, the old woman's horse, galloping after him, gaining on him. But this horse no longer looked the same. Its eyes were glowing red. Its mane and tail were flames. And this horse passed George and his horse very quickly and went around the next bend. And then George heard a scream. As George hurried around that bend, he pulled his horse to a complete stop, for the bridge was out over that creek, and standing next to the creek was Jeb's horse. He looked around quickly, but there was no sign of the old woman's horse. And as he jumped off his horse and looked down into the waters, a flash of lightning lit up the water, and he saw a hand reaching out, and then it was gone. And just then, over the sound of the roar of the thunder and the rain and the wind, George heard, "I said to let me pass. Now you have paid my price." George grabbed the reins of Jeb's horse and hurried home. After a sleepless night, he roused all of his neighbors once the sun had come up, and he told them all what had happened, and they searched high and low for the body of Jeb Bynum. But they never did find it. No one ever saw the old woman or her horse or wagon again. But from that day on, that road was called the Devil's Racetrack, because George Bynum swore he and his brother had raced the devil's own horse and lost. Now, legend has it, if you were to drive down the Devil's Racetrack here in Johnston County, North Carolina, on a cold and stormy October night, and if you're able to find the right creek, the one where Jeb Bynum lost his race with the devil, look down into the waters, and you just might see a hand reaching up for help before it's gone forever. And if you listen carefully, above the sound of the thunder and the rain and the wind, you might hear the old woman, "Let me